Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be tackling a figure I'm sure you've heard of, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And you sent us a ton of excerpts from a biography. And let me tell you, this is not your typical science story. We're not just going to rehash the whole, father of the atomic bomb narrative. We're going deeper.
It's really about understanding the man himself. What drove him, what haunted him, and what can we learn from his journey?
Exactly. And that journey begins surprisingly surrounded by art. Oppenheimer was born in New York City, 1904, to a family that collected Picassos and Van Goghs. Not exactly your stereotypical science-obsessed household.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of it. It's interesting to consider how that early exposure to art might have shaped his perspective, Speaks to a mind that appreciates both the beauty of the natural world and the human expression of that beauty.
Yeah, it does make you wonder. But while art filled his childhood home, Oppenheimer's passion was clearly for science. He graduated Harvard in just 3 years, which is just mind-blowing in itself. But there were bumps along the way. He almost got kicked out of Cambridge for, let's just say, a disagreement with a tutor involving an apple took a turn for the worse.
Even geniuses have their struggles. And Oppenheimer was wrestling with bouts of depression during this time. It's a good reminder that exceptional intellect doesn't make one immune to the human condition.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. After Cambridge, he really hit his stride at Göttingen, working alongside some of the biggest names in physics at the time. Heisenberg, Dirac, the list goes on and on. And what's fascinating is that even among these giants, Oppenheimer's work stood out. He wasn't just keeping up, he was making significant contributions.
Yeah, one example that comes to mind is the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. Imagine trying to figure out how a molecule behaves. It's incredibly complex, right? All those atoms and electrons in constant motion. This approximation, which Oppenheimer worked on, essentially says, hey, we can simplify this by treating the nuclei, the heavy parts of the atoms, separately from those zippy electrons.
So it's kind of like trying to predict the movement of a flock of birds. You don't necessarily need to track every single bird. You can kind of get a pretty good idea just by focusing on the overall movement of the flock.
That's a great analogy. And what's remarkable is that this approximation, developed in the 1920s, it's still widely used in chemistry and physics today.
Wow, yeah, that speaks volumes about its impact. And let's not forget, Oppenheimer also predicted things like positrons and black holes.
Yeah.
Years before we had the technology to confirm their existence.
Right, that's the power of theoretical thinking. Oppenheimer was able to use existing laws of physics to deduce the existence of phenomena we couldn't even observe yet.
It really makes you appreciate the power of the human mind to push the boundaries of knowledge. But Oppenheimer's journey wasn't just about equations and theories. In the 1930s, he became increasingly politically aware, leaning left and getting involved with groups that would later raise eyebrows.
Yeah, this was a time of great social and political upheaval. The Great Depression, the rise of fascism, many intellectuals, including Oppenheimer, were drawn to leftist ideals as a potential solution to the problems of the world.
And there's debate about whether he ever actually joined the Communist Party. Some sources say he did, others say he didn't.
Yeah, the historical record isn't entirely clear on this point. It's important to remember the context here. Associating with leftist groups was viewed differently before the Red Scare took hold.
Right, so we have this brilliant, complex figure navigating a world on the brink of war. And that brings us to one of the most pivotal points in his life, the Manhattan Project.
World War II was raging, and the race to build an atomic bomb was on. General Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, had a big decision to make. Who could lead the scientific effort at Los Alamos?
And he chose Oppenheimer. That seems like a surprising choice, given his lack of experience managing large-scale projects and his political leanings.
It was certainly a gamble. But Groves saw something in Oppenheimer, a certain drive and ambition that he felt was crucial to the project's success.
And did Oppenheimer live up to that expectation?
Absolutely. Los Alamos went from a few hundred people to over 6,000 in just a couple of years. And remember, he was managing a team of some of the most brilliant and, let's be honest, often eccentric minds in the world.
Yeah, talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Imagine the weight of knowing that you're working on something that could potentially end the war, but also unleash a force unlike anything the world had ever seen.
Oppenheimer didn't just manage the project from afar. He was actively involved, walking among the scientists, discussing ideas, fostering an environment of collaboration and intellectual rigor.
And that's probably what made him such an effective leader in that situation. He wasn't just giving orders, he was inspiring a shared sense of purpose.
Precisely. And that shared purpose ultimately led to the success of the project, culminating in the Trinity test.
The first atomic bomb detonation. I can only imagine the mixture of emotions Oppenheimer must have felt at that moment. a mix of triumph, but also perhaps a sense of dread at what he had unleashed upon the world.
It's a pivotal moment not just in Oppenheimer's life, but in human history, and one that would come to define his legacy in ways he could never have anticipated. It's hard to overstate the impact of that blinding flash in the New Mexico desert. It marked the dawn of the atomic age. And Oppenheimer found himself grappling with its implications.
Yeah, our sources describe him quoting the Bhagavad Gita, specifically that line about becoming death, the destroyer of worlds. It seems like a pretty heavy burden to carry.
It is, and it speaks to a fascinating aspect of Oppenheimer's character. Here's this brilliant physicist steeped in the rational world of science. Yet he's also drawn to mysticism and Eastern philosophy. It's as if he's searching for meaning beyond the equations.
I wonder if that's part of what drew him to the Gita in the first place. Maybe it provided a framework for understanding the moral complexities of his work.
It's certainly possible. The Gita explores themes of duty, dharma, and the consequences of action, concepts that must have resonated deeply with Oppenheimer, especially after Trinity.
Yeah, he even gifted copies of the Gita to people at Los Alamos. Makes you wonder what kind of conversations those gifts sparked.
Right. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for those discussions. Speaks to a desire to share those deeper questions with others, to grapple with the meaning of it all.
But let's not forget, the world wasn't standing still. The war ended, but a new era of tension, the Cold War, began. And Oppenheimer's own past started to catch up with him.
Right. The Red Scare was in full swing, and anyone with even a hint of left-leaning associations was viewed with suspicion. Oppenheimer, with his history of involvement with leftist groups, became a target.
It seems like such a strange twist of fate. He helped America win the war, and now he's being accused of being a security risk. What were the specific accusations against him?
It was a mix of things. Some were legitimate concerns about his past associations, while others were outright fabrications designed to discredit him.
Our sources describe a fabricated story about Soviet attempts to recruit him as a spy. And then there's the testimony of Edward Teller, Oppenheimer's former colleague, who questioned his judgment and loyalty.
The Teller testimony was particularly damaging. It created the impression that even those who knew Oppenheimer best had doubts about his trustworthiness.
It's hard to imagine how devastating that must have been. From national hero to suspected traitor, all because of his political beliefs and the climate of fear that gripped the country.
The 1954 security hearings were a turning point. His security clearance was revoked, effectively ending his government career and casting a long shadow over his reputation.
It's a sobering reminder of how quickly public opinion can turn and how easily individual rights can be trampled in the name of national security.
Yeah, it's a story that resonates even today. We still grapple with these questions of security, freedom of speech, and the limits of government power.
So after this very public downfall, what did Oppenheimer do? Did he retreat from public life entirely?
Not at all. He continued to teach, write, and lecture, and he became increasingly vocal about the dangers of unchecked scientific power, advocating for peace and international control of nuclear weapons.
It's interesting that he didn't become disillusioned with science altogether.
Yeah.
You might expect someone in his position to turn away from it, but it seems like he doubled down on his belief in the power of knowledge, even while recognizing its potential for harm.
I think it speaks to a deep conviction that science, at its core, is a force for good. But it also highlights the importance of ethical considerations. Oppenheimer recognized that scientific progress without a moral compass could lead to devastating consequences.
His story almost feels like a Greek tragedy. A brilliant figure brought low by his own flaws and the forces of history.
There's definitely an element of that. But there's also a sense of resilience in his story. Even after being stripped of his power and influence, he found a way to continue contributing to the world.
And in a way, his later years were a form of redemption. He may have lost his security clearance, but he gained a new platform to speak out about the dangers of the nuclear arms race and the need for global cooperation.
Yeah, he joined forces with other prominent figures like Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell to advocate for peace and disarmament. It was a testament to his enduring influence and his commitment to using his knowledge for the benefit of humanity.
And eventually, there was a kind of official recognition, right? He received the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963.
That's right. It was a prestigious award, and it was seen as a symbolic gesture of rehabilitation, acknowledging his contributions to science and recognizing the injustice of his earlier treatment.
But it couldn't fully erase the scars of the past.
Yeah.
The security hearings left a permanent mark on his life and legacy.
Undoubtedly. It's a stain that remains, a reminder of the dangers of political persecution and the importance of safeguarding individual rights, even in times of crisis.
Oppenheimer's story is full of contradictions, and it raises so many questions. Was he a hero, a villain, a victim of circumstance?
It's not easy to categorize him neatly. He was a complex figure who embodied both the promise and peril of scientific progress, and I think that's what makes his story so fascinating and relevant today.
Absolutely. We're still grappling with many of the same issues he faced. The tension between scientific advancement and ethical responsibility, the role of government in regulating science, the need for international cooperation to address global challenges.
Oppenheimer's life and work serve as a powerful reminder that we can't simply divorce science from its social and political context. We have a responsibility to consider the potential consequences of our discoveries and to ensure that scientific progress serves the common good.
Speaking of scientific progress, there's one question I've been wondering about. If Oppenheimer was so brilliant, why didn't he win a Nobel Prize?
It wasn't just about science for him, though, was it?
Not at all. Our sources mention his deep appreciation for art, literature, philosophy. It makes you wonder how those interests might have influenced his scientific thinking.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, here's a man who helped usher in the atomic age, yet he's also deeply moved by poetry, immersed in philosophy. He even learned Sanskrit to read the Bhagavad Gita in its original language.
Yeah, it wasn't just some casual interest either.
Mm.
As we discussed earlier, the Gita's themes of duty and the consequences of action seem to have resonated deeply with Oppenheimer, especially after that Trinity test.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the Gita. He was well-versed in a wide range of philosophical and literary works, and he often drew on those insights in his lectures and writings.
It makes me think about the importance of a well-rounded education. We tend to put people in boxes: scientist, artist, humanist. But Oppenheimer's story suggests that those boundaries can be fluid, and that cross-disciplinary thinking can lead to new insights and perspectives.
I completely agree. It reminds me of the concept of consilience, the idea that knowledge from different disciplines can come together to create a richer understanding of the world. Oppenheimer seems to have embodied that idea.
And maybe that broader perspective is part of what contributed to his later advocacy for peace and international cooperation. He saw the interconnectedness of things, not just in the scientific realm, but in the human realm as well.
That's a great point. His understanding of the devastating power of the atomic bomb, it wasn't just theoretical for him, it was deeply personal and philosophical. He understood that scientific progress without ethical considerations could lead to disastrous consequences.
Right. It's a lesson that's perhaps even more relevant today, I think, as we face new technological advancements with the potential to reshape our world. We need to think carefully about the implications of these technologies and ensure that they're used responsibly.
Oppenheimer's story serves as a powerful cautionary tale. It's not enough to simply pursue scientific knowledge for its own sake. We must also grapple with the ethical questions that arise from that knowledge and work to ensure that it's used for the benefit of humanity.
So looking back at Oppenheimer's life, the triumphs, the tragedies, the complexities,
Right.
what do you think his lasting legacy will be?
That's a tough one. He was a brilliant mind, a flawed leader, and a man wrestling with the consequences of his actions. I think his legacy is a multifaceted one. He'll be remembered as the father of the atomic bomb, but also as a visionary who understood the potential dangers of unchecked scientific power.
He was both a product of his time and someone who transcended the limitations of his era.
Exactly, and I think his story will continue to challenge and inspire us to think deeply about the role of science in society, the importance of ethical considerations, and the need for global cooperation to address the most pressing challenges of our time.
We started out on this deep dive hoping to understand the man behind the atomic bomb.
Mm.
And I think we've done that. We've seen his brilliance, his flaws, his struggles, his triumphs, and I think we've learned some valuable lessons along the way.
Yeah, lessons about the nature of scientific progress, the responsibility that comes with knowledge, and the enduring power of the human spirit to seek meaning and purpose in a complex and often unpredictable world.
Well said. To all of you listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer. We hope it sparked some thought-provoking conversations and inspired you to explore further. Keep those sources coming, because there's a whole universe of knowledge out there waiting to be explored.